Want to start?
Hello. Just wondering, just to make sure for those that are still there not eating, who has a computer in their organization? Whose organization is managing the computer so you're not local admin? Oh, much less. And normal users? Are normal users local admin? No? Raise your hand if no. Who has a phone, a mobile phone, a smartphone? Whose organization is managing the security of their mobile phone? And MTDs do not count, because that's fake security. So we have the same challenge. These phones are in our pockets, are everywhere. The work phones, the personal phones, the bring your own device phones. And it's a bit about the challenge we face in addressing that advanced opponent we have.
Okay, so after Christophe's introduction, so indeed, just in terms of who we are, so actually it's a full team behind. So all the effort we present here is the journey we are taking, which already started a few years ago. We presented in details a part of it a few years ago, that we also cover with the workshop this afternoon. So if you want to have more details, feel free to join. I guess, on the agenda itself, we'll a bit explain what Christophe kind of already introduced. What is the problem we believed existed? How we started with that, and then we are just going up where we stand today and what we actually plan to do. Everything is still pretty clear, so feel free to take as many pictures as you want. There is no issue there. So just to set up a bit the scene, 2021, we had this report from Amnesty International, followed by others, that revealed that they were able to detect some espionage activities on the civil society, journalists, and other target, on which they also released this tool, MVT, and they explain how they did the analysis. And in that report, they were introducing several facts that actually are important and goes in the line of Christophe, is the fact that those mobile devices, there was a feeling that they might be a target at some point. They were confirming they were a target. They were also confirming that they were not only a target for financial activities, money theft, and these kind of things, but really for espionage, as well as the way they did the analysis. And what they were explaining is they were using something called Sysdiagnose, and that will be what we'll cover with more details, as well as the backups. And they were coming with a tool called MVT, and we'll also explain a bit how we differ from that. Now, on the genesis, back to 2019, so actually before that report, we had the idea that we might have to do something with mobile. We had zero clue what to do with that. So it was like, we might have to do something. So the assumption was a mobile device at the end of the day is just a computer. So it runs an operating system, it runs a bunch of security measures, it runs applications, and so on and so forth. So as any computer, as any device, something bad could happen with those devices. By following a training, and I guess as any good project, around a beer or coffee, there was a discussion on a feature that no one back then really explored, called Sysdiagnose. And just Googling a bit, exploring a bit, we find out that indeed back then there were just a few scripts. So it's also what we actually started. And before going to Sysdiagnose, you could also ask why we didn't just use Amnesty MVT. And there was actually a few reasons for that. Well, the first reason is we actually started before, so that was a reason. But more on the serious side, the public version of MVT focused on user data, on the backup mostly. The issue there is if you touch a backup, you have no clue on what is happening at the operating system level. iOS backup do not contain any information about the logs or what is happening at the OS level. And they only contain the application data, meaning user data, SMSs, photos, emails, configuration, and so on. So from our point of view, we would like to have something which was a bit more at the operating system level and a bit less intrusive in the privacy of the user. And it's where there is this feature that any Apple device have, being a watch, being a phone, a tablet, even the Apple TV does have that. And if you have a Mac, you can just man Sysdiagnose, we'll have more details. It is embedded in all Apple products. It is a diagnostic feature that is there to help developers and the Apple support when something bad happens with their device. So they can investigate what's happening And it contains a huge amount of data about the battery life, which application is consuming battery, which application is consuming the network, all the logs, and so on and so forth. So if you look a bit, any Apple device can trigger a Sysdiagnose. At the end of the day, that's a really big archive, which contains the output of a bunch of commands like just PS. So you have the running processes at the time of the Sysdiagnose. All the logs, at least all the logs that are still on the device, and that's opening another issues. A bunch of preferences, which give a bit of an idea on how the device is configured. They try to be user privacy friendly. There is a summaries as well. So when they run the Sysdiagnose, they generate on the fly a bunch of summaries that already give an idea on how the device behave. And then all the logs, network connections, Bluetooth, associated device, and so on and so forth. So you have a huge pile of things, which come from many, many different sources. And it's on Apple or on you to figure out what this is. And it's where we introduce, so back to 2019, but we are still continuing to develop that. What we call the Sysdiagnose Analyse framework, which in its architecture is a bit inspired by the volatility framework for those that do memory forensic. So the idea is that as an input, we have a huge variety of files. Some are quite common, like the TXT files or just SQLite databases and so on. But you also have things that are way much more Apple things, like the plist file, which can be binary plist or XML plist. And they all, well, many do contain timestamps in different formats, including the famous Cocoa timestamp that you also need to align. So the aim of the framework is to parse all those info, try to make sense, align all the timestamp, and then generate output that you can, with which so you can do something out of it. So we have a bunch of just JSON file that contain, for instance, the list of running processes and the parent-child relationship between processes. It's quite flat on an iOS device, as well as JSON-L files, so one JSON per line that you can easily ingest into like Timesketch, Splunk, Elastic, whatever you want. All of that is now open source, so you can actually download it, enrich it, and use it as you wish. We have released most of the effort, and it contains both the parsing part as well as a bunch of what we call analyzer, which already tried to give a bit of an analysis angle. Now, that's what we built, and we're quite proud of it. It's what we presented 2 years ago. But there is always a but. We have a way to parse the file now. It was confirmed by the Amnesty International report and other follow-up report that should work, and especially if you combine both the backup analysis with the Sysdiagnose analysis. But there was a but for us. We don't have one device. In the MDM of the Commission, we have, I think the latest figure was close to 15,000 iOS or iPadOS devices. So the issue is, if you can do it with one, we can do that with 10,000 plus devices. And it's where we come to the next step.
Yes, so our growth, our attempts to grow in that area, because it is trial, error, and learning from what we're doing. David mentions the elements of the analysis. So we have a Sysdiagnose file. If we just focus on Sysdiagnose, now one of the questions is, okay, how can you get it? Everything starts with the generation of the Sysdiagnose. So it is quite easy. So in one way, the very easy way, it requires human interaction. So you press 3 buttons at the same time for 1.2 seconds or more, not much less. I mean, it just depends. You get some different results depending on the phone version.
Always fit.
On computer, on a Mac, there's a shortcut. If you do man Sysdiagnose, you will find the magic shortcuts. But there's also like a very creative and cool feature using a remote XPC. It just requires developer mode, some debugging tricks, creative tricks, pairing certificates, and local VPN. So quite easy and simple. Of course, Apple makes our life much easier. So whenever your phone is linked to the MDM, you can find on the Apple website, there are 2 functions. One is to trigger Sysdiagnose collection remotely, and the other is to collect the Sysdiagnose to your MDM system. That would be too easy, of course. So that brings us to, well, we can have the generation by humans pressing the 3 buttons, or if we plug it in on a computer or use creative tricks, we still have the challenge of collecting Sysdiagnose files. Again, it is quite easy. You have human intervention, or you use, again, creative tricks, which can work with one phone. Like David said, we don't have one phone. We have many phones. Organization-owned phones. We have bring your own device, personal iPhones and iDevices. So you can't really get everyone coming to you to do the data. I mean, some more VIPs or VVIPs or VVVVVIPs. Well, it's the world that turns around them because they have so many important things to do. So you need to get to them at the right time and at the right moment. So it doesn't really scale up. Discussing that whole, how can we scale that up? We are looking at solutions. So for now, we looked at different options. Some people were using iOS shortcuts. It's kind of a cool app on an iPhone or iOS device where you can do kind of a scripting thing, and using shortcut, you can share a Sysdiagnose file with a shortcut. Unfortunately, that's not something you can deploy with an MDM. So for us, that's not an option because we don't want to share users kind of a shady looking URL. So please click on that shady looking URL and share things with that URL you don't really trust. So we looked at the on one side, a thing that we can deploy with the MDM is a kind of a companion app, an app on the phone, iPhone, iPad, and so on. On the other hand, we also sometimes need human support. I usually take the reference my father and mother needs to be able to do something because not all of us are tech savvy. So we're also keeping in mind the human contacts with proximity support, like local support, IT support, and potentially people who are like mixed savvy and want to help us compensate some limitations of the on-device direct collection. That we have like an application that's deployed on the computer. They plug in their phone on the computer, and then they are helped. So we kind of worked out a companion app. In addition, of course, we're looking at what the market brings. The market is still young. As David mentioned indirectly, I mean, we don't really have like the ability to deploy like MDRs or any other kind of tools locally, I mean, remotely on those devices and get like low-level access. So we need to find those creative methods. So our companion app, actually that's a bit an older version already, is just there to hold the hand of the person so that we can help people who are either located in other buildings or even located abroad or while traveling and are not really tech savvy. So it kind of guides them on what you should be doing. We try to use creative tricks to monitor when the Sysdiagnose is running in the background, because Apple doesn't really say, oh, you pressed the 3 magic buttons, Sysdiagnose is running and it will tell you when it's finished. No, it's just running in the background and you just need to wait a certain time. So we use creative tricks to, despite the sandbox, to figure out when it's running, when it's finished, and then we guide the user through instructions on how to share that with us. So here you can see an animation. So the user is then pressing the share button, and then within that list you can see share with AU phone check. And then they can explain that they were at customs. Customs took their phone for 2 hours, which is actually the scenario for this afternoon's workshop. And then they submit it, and we get it on our backends. Of course, it takes some time to upload. And then it's on our backends, and we can try to actually start the real work. I mentioned briefly human contacts are important, so we were also looking at having kind of a Raspberry-style mini computer where everything is automated with some monitoring so that it's quite easy. We were looking at considering it was developed in Python, why not just make an exe out of it and deploy it on the computers and deploy it in our app store on computers to also guide the users use those same concepts and principles. Because actually the Sysdiagnose, local Sysdiagnose collection doesn't contain everything that's on the phone. For example, crash logs, they are limited in time window. Like David mentioned, there are summaries files saying, oh, I excluded those and those and those and those crash logs because they are too old. It's not interesting to you. Maybe not to the app developer, but really, really interesting for us. So having also the ability to have the extra time window, the broader time window of data is also quite relevant. Now that also brings some challenges. It's a cat and mouse game, so attackers, they might be monitoring that you're plugging a USB device to collect those things. So they might also be monitoring that you're running Sysdiagnose. Maybe there are traces in Sysdiagnose that they are monitoring and that they kill some things and so on. So we're really eager to see more and more capabilities in that market. We kind of compare it to doing computer security 20 years ago with modern technology and really advanced attackers. So that really ups the game. Really eager to see Apple provide some nice customer-friendly API functions. So building blocks, so we have that on-device telemetry, we can try to collect it. We then have the challenge of analysis, which we see in kind of a long-term and short-term storage models, where we do that remote upload on the short-term storage, and then we bring that together on our central location on long-term storage capability. Finally, we can start working. So we have the data, and we can convert it with what David presented with the Sysdiagnose analysis framework. The data analytics, you load it into your favorite tool, and you do some analysis. Like David mentioned, not all data is time-based, so you also need to keep in mind that there are other type of JSON files, and also keep in mind that not everything from the Sysdiagnose is converted by our tool yet already. So that's also to keep in mind that everything is not in one magical product and solution. A few examples of the treasure, the text is maybe a bit small, sorry for that, of the treasures we find in Sysdiagnose data sets. So these are just examples of Splunk queries, which accounts are linked to the phone, which is quite interesting because usually people have multiple Apple devices when they're into that ecosystem, which iTunes accounts, and you can even plot the evolution over time. Sandbox violations of applications, which is really funny when you see like some security applications really doing weird things to check if there's malware, to check for the existence of a specific file at a specific location, and so on. But like David mentions, power consumption, so you can actually plot like really nice graphs of battery usage on short term or sometimes longer term, depends on which data you get. You don't always have full control. App usage over time also, thanks to the battery stats, which can maybe also give some traces of evil running and so on. Now, David mentioned there are different type of sources. One of the treasures is the unified logs or log archive, which is like the full logging capability of iOS. When you export that with Sysdiagnose, you get a time frame of 1 to 3 days, but it's not like fully rotating. It depends on which type of log. It rotates faster or later. So when you connect it using the USB cable, you get a bit more. So it's really a treasure. Now the time frame is really, really, really small. So that means that whenever something really interesting happens, there are a lot of chances to find the traces, but you need to be in the right time window. Another challenge is that the volume of the data is really huge. Which during the workshop we touch a CTF image, and if you zoom in on 1 second, you get like 50,000 events in that 1 second. So this kind of finding the needle in the massive haystack of a time frame of 1 second. But you can start doing data analytics, and so crash logs, really massive, beautiful source of information, and I mentioned the log archive too. Crash logs, so you'd like to know which type of data is of interest to look at. One of the things we were also looking at is Apple publishes vulnerability reports, and so by analyzing the Apple information, you can actually see that Apple sometimes mentions that extremely sophisticated attacks used these vulnerabilities. So that can be an indicator on which type of crash logs are more or less interesting than the others. Of course, these are only for Apple services, but what about the WhatsApp and other tools that are exploited by attackers? So today, we have our building blocks. And to these, we add our analysis, which is, like David mentioned, MVT. It's not our core tool, but it's part of our tooling. We will probably add more tools in the future. We have the Sysdiagnose analysis framework. We have our databases or like dynamic engines to search. And these kind of fit in the workflow picture of step-by-step collection, indexing, processing, and analysis. We're not stopping there. We also have like a bigger overview. This is just the techie side, the detection and monitoring and potential monitoring, because again, like these are snapshots in time, so we better have like live access to live streamed logs. There are some tricks, as mentioned in the previous slides, to creative tricks to get like live logging of the device. But it is the question, can we scale up? We haven't answered that question yet. Some vendors also are researching this, but we are also unsure on how that can really be scaled to my parents' level of IT skills of the end user. So we have an overall program that we launched to improve the overall mobile device security over the full commission, which is really focused on first looking at risks. So the question like, where is the information? What do we want to have about the information? What's a problem to be found by the opponents, but also looking at which other capabilities do we need to complement our security measures to also cover those areas. One key point in the program is also collaboration within all the entities within the Commission, but also collaboration outside of the Commission, because we're really in a domain where all of us are very immature, except the attackers maybe. So we really see that collaboration is a win for everyone. And that brings us to the future.
Thank you. So from all the slides Christophe presented of all the pieces we have built, we were in a situation that we feel is okay in a way, so we have something. And this is actually the path we took and where we would like to go. So the first step was to confirm that it works. We have released a few pieces in open source. So the Sysdiagnose framework was open source. The Splunk technical add-on was open source as well. We hope to release others. We have seen the previous slide, the librarian, for instance, that just collect and index all the Sysdiagnose might be open source at some point. So we are trying to reach the at-scale level, and it's where we have the apps and all the other things. But that's actually not enough, because we have a bunch of issues today when it comes to device analysis, and those that are familiar with incident response probably knows that very well, is we have some tools now, but you don't necessarily know what to search for. And that's actually really a big issue. So for those that are lucky, Apple do send Apple threat notification when they know or feel that a device, well, an account might be at risk. It's not a device. And you may now be reported by user that they have received a mail from Apple, but it doesn't say what make them believe that the device or the account might be at risk, when it happened. So when you have to start digging into that, you have basically no starting point. Knowing that if you look at the Sysdiagnose, most of the data is just a few days old. You might have traces that go back to a few years, but you don't know where to start. So that's typically when doing incident response forensic, that's a major issue. Another issue that exists is today, we do share IOC, TTPs, and many things over MISP and many other tools. There are CTI report on many advanced attacks, but not so much on mobile. Not to say zero on mobile or close to zero, which means that again, we face an issue where you don't know what you need to search. and which make the analysis very, very difficult, and especially with the amount of data. So on one side, what we hope with what we are trying to do there is at scale, we can start to do data mining, and try to build a baseline and search for deviations. But the other side, we don't have proper IOC that are shared, or when IOC are shared, they tend to be burnt. There were a few months ago, Predator IOC release, they were burned in like 2 or 3 days, which make the search very, very difficult, which also leads to probably a call for collaborations and just, having a common effort as we tend to do in many other topics, which on one side is to share those TTP and IOC in at least strategic groups. And on the other side, it's probably a dream there at some point, but from the vendor side, none of the vendor being Android and iOS, that's the same on both, none of them do offer a way to check the integrity of a device. So when you receive an Android phone or just an iOS or iPad, there is no way to check if what is running on the device is pristine and if the integrity of the device remains. And that's something that today miss. If on another operating system you do have logs, you have ways to check the integrity. That's not visible today in the mobile world. And that should probably come from the vendors. In our plans, as mentioned, I guess it was clear, we do still actively develop the Sysdiagnose Analyse framework. You are free to contribute if you wish. It's open source. It's the open public license which allowed to just really use it. We are trying to still explore other artifacts. Some of them already in, others are still being explored. It's not always completely clear the value of each, and sometimes there is a value of one log and the value disappears with the new version. It's just happened recently with the new iOS. Where they erase some log at each reboot, which does not help. We have released, as I mentioned, other pieces in open source, and we plan to continue so. And there is a workshop this afternoon if you want to touch. There are 2 images. And with that, I guess it's time for question if we have a few minutes.